Do you really understand the Skyrim skill tree? Like, do you really know what you're doing when you get that perk point? Why are you so good at lockpicking then? How come you're finding treasure all the time? I didn't understand the Skyrim skill tree for a longer time than I'm probably willing to admit. And in my defense, it's not that big of a deal early in the game, and I do go very hard in combat anyway. But what happens when you get to higher levels? Have you ever found yourself deep in a dungeon staring at a door wondering, how are you actually supposed to defeat that enemy in the final room and get out of here? Does my player character suck? You check the skill tree to see what you've been doing with all of those skill points you've earned, and that's when it hits you. Your new favorite player character, Woody Bosmer, is a milk drinker. He spent all of his perk points foolishly, and now he's dependent on being able to transmute ore quickly to escape Labyrinthian. If you watched this video to the end, I would really appreciate it if you dropped a like or comment down below to help support the channel. It is a really hard time to be a new channel on YouTube, making original content on your own versus the wave of AI generated content that gets pushed by the algorithm. So even the smallest engagement with the video is greatly appreciated. If you really enjoy it or you find it helpful for planning your next Skyrim build, then hitting subscribe is the absolute best way to show your support for this content. Of course, I have to say that if you're already here, then you've already done the greatest thing to help, which is clicking the video, so thank you very much. Perk points allow your character player to become stronger in skills like archery and light armor, which help you in combat against the higher level enemies that you can encounter as the game progresses. If you waste your skill points on perks you don't really want instead of investing them into the core skills that you need to play the game without constantly hitting the load screen, you could find yourself with a level 50 player character that simply gets beaten up by everything it encounters in the wilds of Skyrim. This isn't fun, but it does make sense within the world. It's part of the game design and reflects your in-game role-playing choices. If you decide to be a sneaky lockpicking merchant that does a lot of crafting as a front for your criminal enterprises, then of course you're not going to be able to fight as well as an orc tank that two-hands everything that runs across its path. Now you could of course recruit a follower to handle combat for you if you want to be that combat-free merchant build I described. But I think in general, we all want to be able to handle ourselves in-game without having to constantly hide behind an NPC. So how do we level our player characters so they're able to survive all of the combat encounters that Skyrim throws at them, even at the highest level? Or I think the better question is, how do we do it without simply dumping all of our perk points into the combat skills and still have some perks left over to have some fun with? I have my own system which I'm going to share with you now, but before we get to that, we need to talk about leveling in general and clarify the exact issue that we are trying to overcome to achieve more fluent character builds that can be played for longer. Skyrim has 18 separate skill trees that contain a total of 180 base perks, with some of these perks having multiple levels of improvement, making for 251 total perks in the game. A single perk point is unlocked every time we level up our character. We level up our character by gaining XP in one of 18 skill trees. Each skill tree has a unique XP level that only increases when skills related to that tree are successfully used in game. The XP is capped at a max level of 100 for every skill, at which point it stops increasing and we no longer gain XP from that skill. Every time we raise our XP by another level, that contributes to an increase in our overall XP, which decides our player character level. When we gain enough XP increases, we reach the next level. It's important to understand this next part because this is the exact cause of our perk point conundrum. As each XP level and player level increases, it takes an increasing amount of new XP points to reach the next level. The XP required to go from level 99 to level 100 is far greater than to go from level 20 to 21, for example. This constant leveling increase, along with the cap on XP gained from a skill once we reach level 100, means that we will eventually run out of XP to gain to continue leveling up our character. In game, this is reflected by a typical max level cap of level 80 for your player character. At this point, there will not be enough available XP for you to gain in order for you to hit the XP requirement for you to move to level 81. Now, there is a way to level your character beyond level 80, but this involves the legendary system. I don't want to talk about the legendary system that much in this video because the legendary system can give the impression that there is a simple mechanism in-game that allows you to keep leveling. The legendary system does allow that, but it is not as straightforward as you might imagine if you've never used it. My simple advice right now on the legendary system is this. It is a lot harder to regain perk points in a skill tree you actually use when using the legendary system than you may think, and it may lead you into a loop of constantly resetting and grinding up skills just to regain skills you previously had and gain the easy way during your initial leveling. So to boil it down, in a single playthrough of Skyrim, you will reach a max level of 80 in normal gameplay. This means that you can't unlock every skill in the game without the legendary system. This also means that it pays off in the long run to invest our perk points carefully so we get the best character build possible for ourselves so we can enjoy a long playthrough. How do we do that every time without ever messing it up? I am going to show you now. While the Skyrim skills are organized into 18 different skill trees, I want you to forget about that for the time being. I am going to explain what the real skill groups are and how you can understand what they mean for your character build. We need to start with combat because these are the most important groups to get right to ensure a long, enjoyable playthrough. Combat can be split into two main groups, which can each be split again into two further groups. The first thing you need to understand is offense. In order to successfully play the combat parts of Skyrim, you need to have some form of offense. Your offense will be made up of two parts, your ranged offense and your melee offense. You need to have a solution for both of these requirements, and there are only a couple of options. For ranged combat, this is the breakdown. Either you incorporate a bow or a crossbow into your build, or you use destruction magic or conjuration magic to give yourself a ranged option. This means that you will depend on at least one of three skill trees for your ranged combat: archery, destruction, or conjuration. For melee combat, the physical damage options are different. You will use either one-handed or two-handed attacks for your melee damage, or the same magic classes I mentioned for ranged combat, destruction and conjuration. Now you can do some limited melee damage with a bow, but this isn't comparable with what can be achieved with one-handed or two-handed weapons. You can also do melee damage with a shield, which is stronger than a bow, but still isn't comparable with one-handed or two-handed weapons either. So just as before with the ranged combat, for your melee offense, you can really only choose between destruction, conjuration, one-handed or two-handed as options. This gives us two groups that we need to pick two skill trees from. For ranged offense we need archery, destruction or conjuration, and for melee offense we need one of destruction, conjuration, one-handed or two-handed. I think it would be worth pointing out at this stage that the most versatile skill in both of these groups is conjuration. Not only does conjuration give you options for ranged and melee combat, it also allows you to gain XP in archery, one-handed and two-handed through its selection of bound weapons. Destruction magic is also a single tree that can address all combat needs, although its effectiveness in ranged and melee combat is poorer than any of the other options individually. It doesn't do as much melee damage as quickly as one-handed or two-handed weapons, nor does it deal the same damage over distance as archery, but it does do both to a certain degree without the need for specialized spells like Conjuration does. It's up to you to pick, but you do need at least one option for both ranged and melee offense in combat. Whichever option you pick, you should choose a main early and start leveling it as early as possible. Having one powerful combat skill is a must for almost every high-level character player in Skyrim. Decide at the beginning of your playthrough which skills you will use for both and stick with them, and you're sure to have a competent player character that can clear most dungeons without having to quick save every time you turn a corner. If you're still with me on this, then the next group we need to look at is defense. And just as with offense, defense can be broken down into two main groups: defense from physical damage and defense from magical damage. Not all damage is equal, and you need dedicated protection from both. There's also a third class of damage, which is poison damage, but there is only one way to gain protection from poison damage in the skill trees, and it's not where you might expect, so we'll discuss that later. Protection from physical damage can be gained from one of 4 skill trees: heavy armor, light armor, block, and alteration. Any of these 4 options can protect you from physical damage in Skyrim, so you need to pick at least one and possibly 2 in most cases, if you want to protect yourself. While it's up to you what choices you make, looking at which skill trees can protect us from magica damage might change your outlook. While both heavy and light armor are favourites among Skyrim players because they make your clothes give you more protection, only block and alteration offer possible solutions for increasing your protection against magica damage. The majority of the damage that your character is dealt during a playthrough will depend on your choices, but for the most part, we encounter a lot more physical damage than magica damage. Creatures, bandits, dragons, giants, hired thugs, assassins, and thieves all deal physical damage, so we need to have an option to negate this. At the same time, dungeon bosses, dragon priests, Draugr overlords, and a lot of other high-level player enemies will try to do massive magica damage to us if possible, so it can't be simply neglected either. My simple breakdown is this: you need to pick one type of armor which will be a large part of protecting you from physical damage, and then you need to pick either block or alteration to protect yourself from magical damage. This creates a simple set of choices for us about which trees we need to invest in for our protection, one for physical damage and one for magical damage. There is another group related to combat that we should look at, and that is what I will call survival. As we engage in combat, we will lose health, magica, and stamina, and we will sometimes need to restore it mid-combat or between combat if we're in a dungeon, for example. There are 2 main options that you can choose from: alchemy or restoration. Both are fantastic skill trees, and they can make you very overpowered if you invest a lot of skill points in them, but they may not be suited to every build type. The basic breakdown between these 2 is this: while alchemy can heal us quickly and effectively in-game, it typically only provides us with temporary buffs that we need to constantly replenish by crafting more potions. It does have the added advantage in-game of allowing us to also brew poisons, which allows us to deal more damage in-game, and is the skill tree where we can opt to give ourselves protection against poison. But it does, as I said, have a hard limit dependent on having a stock of restoration potions in our inventories at all times to be effective. Restoration provides us with permanent buffs that are not as strong and need to be executed in-game to be effective, but it does have the massive advantage of only requiring available magica to execute. Choosing only one of these trees to invest into is typically enough on its own for any playthrough, but I personally like to take a mixture of perks from the beginning of both of these skill trees instead of maxing out one entirely. It's up to you at the end of the day, but it pays to invest in one of these two skill trees to support your combat skills. And that is actually it in terms of understanding combat. We need to cover 2 offensive scenarios, dealing ranged and melee damage, and we need to cover 2 defensive situations, protecting ourselves from physical damage and magical damage. We could invest into 4 different skill trees to address these concerns, or only 2 if we want to. You could choose destruction magic and alteration magic, for example, and cover all 4 concerns at once. Or you could pick light armor and block for defense and one-handed and archery for offense. It's up to you. Along with these 4 concerns, we also need to consider survival, whether we choose to heal ourselves through alchemy or restoration, or a combination of the 2. At this point, we have a decision matrix for one-handed, two-handed, archery, block, heavy and light armor, destruction magic, conjuration, alteration, restoration, and alchemy. That's 11 of the 18 skill trees, which isn't bad. So what's left over? The remaining skills are enchanting, smithing, illusion, lockpicking, pickpocketing, sneak, and speech. From these skills, there is another grouping that I think most Skyrim players will naturally understand: crafting. Enchanting and smithing, along with alchemy, are the main crafting skills in the game. Crafting is a really fun activity, and it allows us to make gear and weapons that can negate almost everything that I've already just explained about combat. Combining high-level skills in smithing, alchemy, and enchanting will allow you to break the game in terms of combat difficulty, and make yourself into an existence-level threat within Skyrim. Your decision about whether or not you invest into crafting comes down to one essential question that you should ask yourself when starting a new playthrough. How overpowered do I actually want to become in combat? The reason you need to ask yourself this is because crafting can actually make combat in Skyrim borderline irrelevant if you simply min-max all of your gear and weapons. Again, this is your decision, but I think it's important to understand one thing about this. If you decide to go heavy on crafting, you will spend a lot of perk points to the point where you may need to be excellent in crafting for your player to do well against the foes of Skyrim. You will also hamstring yourself in terms of your ability to unlock advanced level combat skills across enough of the combat tree skills. That's right, folks, you can't really be a master level craftsman and a master level warrior or destruction mage in Skyrim at the same time. Remember what I said earlier about how you have a max cap of 80 perks in normal gameplay? Even if we start taking this methodical approach to selecting the skills we want to invest in, there still isn't enough perk points to max out your character in more than 2 or 3 skill sets really. Okay, we've opened up the can of worms that is crafting. Should we take a look at the remaining skills before we try to summarize this and see if we're any better at understanding the Skyrim skill tree? Let me go through this as efficiently as I can. Lockpicking is not a real skill, and you should never invest your perk points into this tree. Not for any reason. Just forget this exists and pretend there are only 17 skill trees. Okay, that leaves us with speech, sneak, pickpocketing, and illusion. Sneak, pickpocketing, and illusion could all essentially be classified as stealth skills. If stealth is important to you, you might want to pick one of these trees to invest in. Typically, sneak is the one people choose because it has a really strong skill tree and introduces the silent roll, which is a really cool game feature for any build. Pickpocketing is something of a niche pursuit and is a bit of a joker in the pack. It has some cool features, but you can play the entire game without ever needing anything from this skill tree. Illusion magic is essential for any stealth magic user because it contains the perk that makes spell casting silent. Stealth is a cool feature of the game, but it's not essential, and even in quests where we are explicitly told to use stealth, There is almost zero consequence to ignoring those commands. If you need it for your build, then you need it for your build. But the truth is that it can be ignored as a skill group in a way that you could never do with combat. Okay, with every skill group now covered, it's time to recap and try to spell this all out clearly so we can establish a base set of assumptions about the Skyrim skill trees and how we can use them to our advantage. We now know that level 80 is our max target level for gaining skill perks. This means that we will have a maximum of 79 skill perks that we can invest into over our playthrough. Those 79 skill perks need to be invested to cover each of these essential forms of combat skill. We need a skill for ranged offense, and we need a skill for melee offense. This can be the same skill if we want it to be, or it could be two individual skills. We also need a skill for protection from physical damage and a skill for protection from magical damage. Again, we can pick a skill for each, or we can pick an individual skill that covers both bases. We also need at least one skill that will help us restore our player character's vital elements: health, stamina, and magicka. At this point, we need 5 individual skills, or 3 skills, that are shared between duties. If we ensure that all of these bases are covered and we invest enough skill points to ensure we are up to scratch with in-game combat, then we have 2 further categories that we can look at to improve our player character even further. We can invest points into crafting and stealth skills that will further boost our performance in combat. That might sound very simple in practice, so let's use this to create some actual builds and see what they look like. First up, let's look at a build where we dedicate a skill to covering each group so we can see how the perk points really stack up with a fully leveled character. For ranged combat, let's select archery, and for melee combat, let's select one-handed. Then for physical defense, we could choose light armor, and for magic defense, we can choose alteration. If we add in alchemy as our survival-based skill, we are looking at investing in 5 unique skill trees for our character. Not every skill tree is equal. Some have more potential perks than others, but if we by level 80 have invested fully into these 5 skill trees, we will have spent 16 points on archery, 21 points on one-handed, 10 points on light armor, 14 on alteration, and 15 points on alchemy. This brings us to a total of 76 points, which means we could fully invest into all of these trees and still have 3 points left over. Now you might be hearing those amounts and think 21 points for one-handed. That sounds like a massive investment, and you would be right. This is a massive investment which covers reaching max damage with 3 different classes of one-handed weapons: swords, war axes, and maces, as well as a separate branch that covers dual wielding. What if we were to make a more focused investment into one-handed and only pick one weapon type? War axes, for example. They're my favourite. If we decide that our character will carry one war axe, then we only need to invest 8 perk points into one-handed to give ourselves top level war axe abilities. This reduces our total perk point spend to 68, giving us 11 spare perk points to distribute between crafting and stealth abilities to flesh out our character. Not bad for a player character that is maxed out in terms of combat abilities, with skills dedicated to cover each of the main combat scenarios that the game throws at us. And you could make further savings on some of the trees, such as alteration or alchemy, for example. With this in mind, it could be possible to really max out one of the trees from crafting or stealth if we wanted to, in addition. Let's look at a different type of build and see how it works. Let's do the same thing again, but let's choose shared skills to invest in, so we can simplify our perk point investment entirely. I'm going to choose Conjuration Magic for my ranged and melee offense, and I'm going to choose Block for my protection from physical and magicka damage. You can of course pair a suit of armor with your block skill, but most of your defense will be generated by your shield, with your suit of armor providing a minor buff. Along with this, let's select Restoration as our survival skill. If we want to invest fully into each of these trees, we will spend 16 points on Conjuration, 13 points on Block, and 13 points on Restoration, for a total of 42 perk points with 37 points left over. This is a huge chunk of perk points for us to spend on other skills, enough that we could probably max out all of the crafting skills and still have high level skills in place to deal with all of the potential combat scenarios we may face. That is a huge amount of flexibility for your character to have in terms of perk point spend, and means that we can instantly take a more relaxed approach to how we spend our skill points if we can't immediately plan how our budget should be spent. This has been a lot of rambling about a very abstract part of the game, which basically involves making sure that we can turn our player character into our version of a Dragonborn instead of a dummy that is really good at picking locks, but completely average at everything else. But I hope it helps. For a final summary of everything I'm trying to say here, if you keep in mind the 4 major combat scenarios we have discussed, dealing ranged and melee damage, and defending physical and magicka damage, and invest perk points to improve your character in areas dedicated to these 4 scenarios early, you will have the flexibility to spend your perk points in a way that will avoid nerfing your player character before it can become truly high level. This will also mean you can play it for as long as you enjoy the build without the game becoming too grindy combat wise. I'm going to leave it there for now. I put up another longer video on this channel this week, which is a deep dive and ranking of all the skill trees if you want to hear more about Skyrim skills and leveling your character. As I said in the beginning, awesome stuff that you clicked on this video, and I really appreciate that you gave it a chance. If you've reached the end of the video, you know what to do. Please hit up the buttons with some engagement so I can get a bit of juice on here and I can keep making videos like this, so we can waste as much time as possible talking about our favorite game. If there's something in the game that you don't understand or you're having trouble figuring out, drop it in the comments below and I can make a video about it if I know how to help. Alright, take care of yourselves, be safe, and I'll see you soon for more Skyrim nonsense. Good luck.